She called my womb empty, and they laughed. We were gathered in Rachel's sunlit backyard, the table dripping with pastel decorations, tiny cupcakes, and glittering mommy-to-be banners. I sat quietly at the edge, folding my hands in my lap, trying to keep the smile on my face as Margaret, my mother-in-law, leaned over and said, "Well, Natalie, looks like you'll be the last to join the mom club. If ever." The words stung sharper than they should have. I'd heard versions of that line 100 times, each one a little jab wrapped in a sugary laugh. Rachel, glowing and pregnant, tossed her blonde hair and smirked playfully. "Oh, Aunt Nat," she chimed. "You're the cool, carefree one. Right? No diapers or spit up for you?" My throat tightened. My fingers dug into the napkin on my lap. Ethan sat beside me, chuckling nervously. "Hey now, let's not gang up on my wife," he murmured. But his arm never moved to wrap around me. His voice never rose to truly defend. I smiled, small and polite, nodding as if I was fine, as if my heart wasn't twisting itself into knots. They didn't know the years we'd spent trying. They didn't see the nights I cried on the bathroom floor, staring at negative tests. They didn't understand the heartbreak, the quiet grief that clung to me like a second skin. To them, I was just the one without kids, the one who had to endure the jokes because, after all, what else could I do? I excused myself halfway through the party, stepping into Rachel's immaculate kitchen, gripping the counter, breathing hard. I told myself to hold it together, to not let them see me break. But inside, the familiar ache pulsed, a deep, gnawing loneliness that never quite let go. I heard the laughter from the yard, the clinking of glasses, the chorus of voices toasting Rachel's glowing motherhood. I swallowed the lump in my throat, pressing a hand to my stomach, feeling the old ache stir again. I told myself, "You are strong. You can survive this. You've survived it 100 times before." But this time, something inside whispered back, "Not much longer." I went home that night and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the framed photos on the dresser. Ethan's face smiled back at me from every memory. Our wedding day, the beach trip, the ski weekend. A woman like me should have stayed quiet, right? That's what Margaret's eyes always told me. Be grateful, be small, accept your place. Ethan came in, loosening his tie, dropping onto the bed beside me. "They don't mean anything by it," he murmured, brushing my hair back. I smiled tightly, biting down on the words bubbling up. He lied, saying it didn't bother him, but it did. I saw it in the flicker of guilt on his face, the way his shoulders tensed. For years, I dreamed of telling Margaret off, of shutting down Rachel's smug little smirks. But every time I imagined speaking up, something stopped me. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was exhaustion. Or maybe it was the crushing weight of knowing they'd never see me as enough. That night, I sat in the bathroom, door locked, staring at the faint pink lines on the pregnancy test I hadn't told anyone about. My heart pounded, my hands shook. Tears pricked the corners of my eyes. After years of heartbreak, after years of doctors and blood work and loss, here it was. I pressed the test to my chest, rocking slightly on the cool tile floor, feeling the tears spill over. Grief and joy tangled together in a dizzying knot. I thought about the cruel jokes, the empty womb comments, the whispered pity behind my back. And I thought, they have no idea. I could have run downstairs that night and told Ethan, shouting, the news, jumping into his arms. But something in me held back. Not out of fear, out of a deep, sharp instinct. I wanted this moment to be mine, just for a little while longer. Because after all the years they'd spent defining me by what I finally had the chance to redefine myself on my own terms. I sat on the edge of the bed for hours, holding the test in my hands, feeling the weight of it sink deeper into my chest. He lied, saying it didn't bother him, but it did. I remembered every time Ethan shrugged off Margaret's comments, every time he laughed softly when Rachel poked fun, every time he said, "Let's not make a scene, Nat." But now I had something they didn't know, something they couldn't twist or take away. I pressed a hand to my stomach, whispering, softly, "You're here." It felt surreal, like the fragile beginnings of a dream I was afraid to touch too hard. I could hear Ethan moving in the other room, humming under his breath, oblivious. And for once, I didn't run to share the news. I didn't blurt it out or cry in his arms. I sat with it, holding it close, letting the quiet power of it fill me. For so long, I had felt small in that family. The one without kids, the outsider, the woman they pitied or teased or dismissed. I had been shrinking myself for years, folding, inward to keep the peace, to avoid confrontation. But something shifted that night. I realized I didn't want to announce my pregnancy as an apology or a celebration. I wanted to announce it as a reclamation, a turning point, a quiet, deliberate flipping of the script. I wanted them to feel the shock, the power shift, the sudden realization that the woman they had written off was about to rewrite the ending. Julia was the only one I told. I met her for coffee the next morning, the words trembling on my lips as I whispered, "I'm pregnant." Her eyes widened, tears springing instantly, her hands flying to her mouth. She hugged me so tight I could barely breathe, whispering, "I knew you'd get here, Nat. I knew it." We sat for hours, plotting, dreaming, laughing through tears. Julia grinned fiercely. "You want to wait, don't you?" I smiled faintly, nodding. "Yeah, I want to tell them when it matters. Because this wasn't just about the pregnancy. This was about taking back the narrative." The baby shower came a week later. A follow-up brunch, all pastel napkins and delicate teacups. The family gathering again to celebrate Rachel. This wasn't family. This was humiliation on repeat. I stood in the mirror before we left, brushing, my hands over my dress, staring at my reflection. My secret pulsed like a live wire under my skin. Ethan poked his head in, smiling softly. "Ready, babe?" I smiled back, small and careful. "Ready." He didn't know. No one knew. And that made me feel powerful for the first time in years. I had something they couldn't laugh at, couldn't poke, couldn't take from me. The moment we arrived, I felt it. The shift in the air, the familiar ache. Margaret's eyes swept over me, her thin smile sharp as a blade. "Natalie, you look rested," she murmured. Rachel floated past, Belly leading the way, laughing brightly. "Still just the cool aunt, huh, Nat?" My stomach tightened. I smiled faintly. "For now." We gathered at the long table, everyone laughing, clinking glasses, the conversation drifting back again and again to babies, motherhood, pregnancy. I sipped my tea quietly, fingers wrapped tight around the cup, heart pounding harder with every word. Margaret leaned in at one point, lowering her voice just enough for me to hear. "You know, dear, I always worried Ethan might want more. A real family, you know?" My face burned. My hands shook, but I smiled. "Thanks for the concern, Margaret." Inside, the rage curled tighter, sharper. For years I had let her chip away at me, death by 1,000 cuts, all wrapped in passive-aggressive smiles and sugary concern. For years I had watched Ethan shrink beside her, too gentle, too passive to push back. But this time, I was done shrinking. I set my cup down carefully, feeling the room pulse around me, the laughter swelling, the clinking of forks and knives, the soft chorus of a family that thought they knew exactly who I was. They were about to find out they didn't know me at all. The night before the brunch, I had tucked the sealed pregnancy test into my purse, hands trembling just slightly. They underestimated the woman they kept wounding. I stood in front of the mirror, watching my reflection, whispering to myself, "You don't owe them a performance. You owe them the truth." All morning I had waited, sat quietly, let the little barbs roll over me like tiny daggers. Ethan laughed along gently, giving me soft glances, but never really stepping in. I watched Rachel preen, Margaret orchestrate, the whole family circling around each other, blind to the storm I was holding in my hands. Julia's text pinged silently on my phone under the table. "You good?" I smiled faintly at the screen. Almost. My heart thudded hard in my chest. I could feel it in my bones, the shift, the power, the reclamation. I wasn't doing this to hurt them. I was doing this to reclaim me. As the brunch wound down, Margaret raised her glass, voice lilting. "To Rachel, may motherhood bring her joy, wisdom, and maybe teach Natalie a thing or two." Soft laughter rippled around the table. My face flushed hot. My fists clenched in my lap. I could hear Ethan chuckle softly beside me, giving me a squeeze under the table, mouthing, "Sorry, babe." And that was the moment. That was the moment I knew I was done. Done swallowing, done shrinking, done apologizing for the body they thought had failed. I reached calmly into my purse, feeling the test between my fingers, heart hammering so loud I thought it might echo off the walls. I felt the surge of clarity, the razor-sharp focus that comes when a decision locks fully into place. I stood slowly, gently, smiling faintly as I lifted my glass. Margaret tilted her head, amused. Rachel grinned softly, radiant, smug. Ethan blinked, at me, confused. "Nat?" he murmured. I set the test on the table, sealed, quiet, unshakable, and I watched the room freeze. The clink of the test hitting the table was louder than I expected, sharp, final, slicing through the laughter like a blade. That was the moment everything changed. Margaret's glass paused midair. Rachel's smile faltered. Ethan's eyes darted between my face and the object now resting calmly beside the silverware. I looked at each of them slowly, feeling my pulse thunder, but keeping my voice steady. "I just thought," I murmured softly, "you might want to know what an empty womb looks like." Margaret's mouth opened, closed, then opened again. No sound, no smug comment, no snide little smirk. Rachel let out a choked laugh, a nervous, brittle sound. "Wait, Nat, are you saying—" I smiled faintly, the edges of my mouth curling just enough. "That I'm pregnant? Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying." Ethan let out a sharp breath, eyes wide, face flushing, red. "Nat, baby, why didn't you—" I held up a hand gently, stopping him. "We can talk later," I murmured. My gaze flicked back to Margaret, who still sat frozen, one hand pressed lightly to her chest. The room had gone so silent I could hear the soft hum of the air conditioning, the distant chirp of a bird outside the window. My heart pounded hard, but I kept my face calm, controlled, deliberate. I wasn't here to gloat. I was here to end something. The narrative they'd written about me. Margaret finally found her voice, thin and shaky. Why wouldn't you tell us?" she whispered. I smiled softly, tilting my head. "Because sometimes, Margaret, the best revenge is letting people underestimate you until the very last moment." Ethan reached for my hand under the table, eyes shining with 1,000 questions, but I squeezed his fingers gently, signaling, later. This was mine. Julia's text buzzed in my pocket. "Did you do it?" I smiled faintly, closing my eyes for a moment, letting the peace settle over me. I had waited so long for this moment, and now that it was here, I didn't feel rage. I didn't feel triumph. I felt something purer. Release. I watched as Margaret slowly set her glass down, her fingers trembling just slightly, eyes darting between me and the sealed test on the table. I just smiled, because they had no idea. No idea how long I'd waited for this moment, how many nights I'd cried, how many times I'd rehearsed this quiet reclaiming of power. Rachel sat back, blinking, her perfect smile flickering into confusion. Nat, are you really? I turned to her calmly, voice soft but sharp. Yes, Rachel. Pregnant. Turns out my womb wasn't empty after all. Her mouth snapped shut, her eyes wide. Ethan squeezed my hand tightly now, his voice low, breathless. Why didn't you tell me, Nat? I turned, meeting his gaze, and for the first time in years, I saw the flicker of realization cross his face. Because I needed one thing, Ethan. One thing that was mine, just mine for once. Margaret opened her mouth again, flustered, cheeks blotching red. Well, we could have celebrated. You should have... I leaned in slightly, voice dropping. You should have what, Margaret? Let me hear the end of that sentence. She flinched, looking down at her plate. The room had shifted entirely now, the energy rippling like a snapped tension wire. The woman they'd quietly pitied, quietly mocked, quietly underestimated. She was standing tall in the middle of the storm, smiling softly, untouched. I sat back down slowly, brushing a hand over my stomach, feeling the steady drum of my own heartbeat. I didn't do this to hurt you, I said gently, looking around the table. I did this because I wanted to remind myself that I get to choose when and how I tell my story. Rachel let out a shaky laugh, brushing a tear from the corner of her eye. Well, congratulations, she murmured, her voice tight. I smiled faintly, nodding. Thank you, Rachel. Ethan kissed my cheek softly, his voice thick. You're incredible, he whispered. And for the first time, I believed him. I folded my hands calmly in my lap, letting the silence stretch, feeling the delicate thrill of a power shift humming through the room. I had been the one they laughed at, the one they poked, the one they dismissed. Not anymore. That night I sat on the balcony, a blanket wrapped around my shoulders, the cool night air brushing across my face. They wanted to define me, but I rewrote the ending. The stars blinked softly above, and for the first time in years, I felt light. Ethan came outside quietly, slipping his arms around me, pressing a kiss to my hair. I'm sorry, he whispered. I should have stood up for you more. I smiled softly, resting my head against his chest. I know, I murmured. But I needed to stand up for myself first. I thought back to Margaret's face, the stunned flush on her cheeks, the way her words had finally crumbled into silence. I thought about Rachel, blinking rapidly, scrambling to cover her surprise, with polite congratulations, and I realized I wasn't angry anymore. The heartbreak, the gaslighting, the emotional abuse, it had shaped me, yes, but it hadn't broken me. I had walked through it, carrying the weight on my back, and now I had set it down, softly, without rage, without shouting, just release. I texted Julia, a simple line. I did it. Her reply came seconds later. You're a queen. I'm so damn proud of you. I smiled, tears prickling my eyes, heart swelling with gratitude. She had been my anchor, my mirror, my reminder that I was never as small as they made me feel. Inside, Ethan curled up beside me, his hands resting lightly on my stomach, his breath warm and steady. I closed my eyes, letting the peace settle deep into my bones. There would be challenges ahead. There always are. But tonight, there was only stillness, only warmth, only the soft, sweet sound of a woman who had reclaimed her voice. I whispered softly to myself, a little prayer, a little promise. You're enough, Natalie. You've always been enough. Because they had tried to laugh me down, belittle me, box me in. But tonight they'd raised a glass to the woman they never expected, the one who smiled quietly, stood calmly, and took her power back without a single raised voice. This wasn't just a baby announcement. This was a rebirth.